I like to plan my services well in advance. And having planned it all with some idea of a sermon in my head, I sort of turn my attention to writing a sermon. And then the day before, I read it through. When I sat down to read it through yesterday, it somehow took on a mind of its own and started bringing in other things. And I thought, right, what do I do? Do I fight this or do I just go with the flow? So I decided to go with the flow. And it's strange how often things happen in the week running up to a service that sort of feed into what you say or make you look at it in a slightly different way. So I felt I had no choice but to include these things. And the first one was, I can't remember what day it was in the week, but we'd walked to Brig House, as one does, and we come back on the bus. And we got on the bus, and sitting on one of the front seats was a young man, probably in his early 20s, complete with tattoos, earrings, tracksuit bottoms, hooded top, you know what and he was sort of sitting there, and it's slightly sprawled across the whole of the seat. But in his arms was the most beautiful baby girl. And the way he was holding her and the way he was looking at her, and I thought, ignore the tattoos and the earrings and whatever it is he's wearing, but look at the look of love upon his face. I wish I had been brave enough to take a photo, because it's a picture that's just stayed with me since. It reminded me of Jesus with us in his arms, that total abiding love, not asked for, but given, freely given. And it really was a beautiful sight. He really was totally engrossed and in love with this little girl. She was probably about 6 or 7 weeks old, fast asleep, still, you know how babies are still curled up for a while before they eventually they straighten out, still in that curled up stage. And I just thought, what a beautiful sight. It reminds us that love is the most important thing that we have. But today's parable about the vine and the branches, yes, I'm a gardener, a very keen gardener. I'm a great believer in pruning. I do so very enthusiastically and have several pairs of secateurs. And sometimes my husband tells me off because he said, you're only supposed to prune the things in your own garden. You're not supposed to start pruning next doors. I said, growing on our side, I'm cutting it off, particularly the Virginia creeper that comes through the hedge on the left. So I do feel that if you prune properly, the bits that are not productive or they're growing in a way that doesn't help the plant or squashes the plant next to it, you can start to produce healthy fruit. And that's, in a way, what the parable's about, keeping that healthy fruit growing so that the tree can achieve its true purpose. I'm always surprised when somebody buys a tree or a shrub and they leave it to grow and don't actually ever do anything with it until it's so big that it's going to cost a fortune to actually do something because it's in the way or it's blocking the sunlight. And I think, why didn't you look after it, nurture it as it was growing and help it to grow in the right way? Because that's what Jesus does for us, isn't it? Helps us to grow in the right way if we listen. I suppose I then started thinking, and I'll come round to why I kept thinking this in a minute. The Methodist Church back in the 19th, 18th centuries grew like mad. It grew and grew because it was needed, but it grew until there was a chapel on practically every street corner. In fact, I brought this book with me, which was written by Professor Amy Binns, who has connections at Heptonstall. It's called The Valley of 100 Chapels, and it just talks about the chapels in the sort of Luttondon, Mythenroyd, that sort of area of the Calder Valley. The Book of 100 Chapels, most of them don't exist anymore. They've been converted into houses, which led me to think, you know, why did they go? Well, the population moved into towns because there was work in mills, there wasn't work in the countryside. And so the congregation shrank, and eventually, and I do mean eventually, the chapels ended up closing. And I'm not saying that we close all the chapels and start again, but when I look at it, I think we were really good at opening chapels wherever they were needed, and stress the word needed, but we can't seem to manage a reversal of the situation. That sometimes chapels on every street corner are not needed, and you have to rethink a strategy for how you're going to deal with that. And I'm not advocating that we close all chapels. And I say this bearing in mind that yesterday, was it? No, it wasn't. It was Friday. You can tell I wrote this yesterday. Friday, my husband and I, Chris, were needed to go and pay Lumbott's Chapel a visit. How many of you have ever been to Lumbott's Chapel? Right, we could all go in one car. So it's a gorgeous setting, isn't it? I mean, it is lovely up there when it's not raining, that is. But it closed in 2013. And for several reasons, we've been unable to actually sell it. And the most difficult reason is the graveyard. People are literally dying to be buried at Lumbott's, and that makes it difficult to close. It will make someone a lovely detached house surrounded by 1,000 graves in various stages of dilapidation, and you can tell why I'm not an estate agent, can't you? In the intervening 13 years, it has cost the circuit a fortune in repairs and insurance, because you close a chapel and it isn't that the costs stop, you have to still keep paying things. Somebody checking on it every so often, going up to make sure it's all right, get somebody to put the slates back on the roof, make sure nobody's broken in, change the locks because somebody has, go to see if somebody else has been buried up there that you didn't know about. The inside of the chapel, bear in mind, it's been closed for 11 years, and I did have the privilege to lead worship there before it closed. Sunday at 2:30 to fit in with milking. Remember, Caroline? Yes. Yes, it was most strange. A congregation of 5, organist in the 90s. It was brilliant. If they saw it inside now, the plaster's falling off, the roof is falling in, and things that were regarded as essentials for worship are just covered in dust and dirt and grime and all the rest of it. And this is the fate, I'm afraid, of many chapels if we can't get them, you know, if we decide we don't need it anymore, if we can't get them sold. I'm not advocating drastic pruning in our circuit. That's for congregations to decide. But sometimes we become too comfortable in our own worship space and we don't want it to change in our lifetime. Sometimes we become too complacent in our own faith. But it's a faith that sometimes needs a challenge. And the challenge is that we need to do things which are missional. We need to help the vine grow, because we're the branches and we have to help it grow. And that's got to be done with love and care and support and encouragement, so that we see what's best for the needs of the future. Sometimes it's guidance to another place where faith can flourish, instead of being, I won't say dragged down, but instead of being surrounded by the problems of keeping a building open, because we do need to see that church is not the building, it's us. What runs through all that we've ever done as a people of faith is bounded by love, our love for each other, but mostly God's love for each and every one of us. Although when I look at some of the people in our world, I think, God's love and patience must be stretched to the limit. But there is no limit. And that's the wonder of God. Limitless love, boundless love. We're all part of that. We're all part of Jesus as the vine. We're all part of God's family. So we're reminded of this in today's reading, that Jesus is the vine and we are the branches. Jesus is the source of our spiritual food and our growth in knowledge and understanding of him. The branches are all believers, and we're all connected through that love for him and each other. We draw our strength from him, no matter what we face in life, and we cannot distance ourselves from him, for without him, we will struggle. As I said, I tried extremely hard to distance myself from Jesus, to rid myself of this burden that we call faith. And I won't bore you with why I suddenly felt disconnected from church. It happened during lockdown and COVID, and I did try to walk away from it all. And as you'll see, failed miserably, because I'm still here. No, I'm not an atheist, it's still preaching, in case you were wondering. So the pruning that we experience takes the form of the trials that we face. For as I said earlier, life is a difficult journey. A life lived through Jesus is a challenge, one that we've accepted, one that we live with every day. But we persevere. And I feel the more that we persevere, the stronger we and our faith become, because we face those trials, not on our own, but with God's love to support us. As we grow stronger in faith, so this entity that we call church should become stronger. But that's not happening at the moment. Although there is new growth in some of our churches, there are 3 churches that now have a significant number of children attending worship on a Sunday morning. But we're still seen as a church in decline. You can't rebuild quickly. You rebuild slowly. And that's the biggest challenge that we face. If we're to bear fruit, we must grow our faith, be true disciples, and bring people to Jesus. For surely that is what is lacking in so many people's lives. And they, in God's terms, could become worthless, and they are pruned. I don't think anybody can ever be completely distanced from God and his everlasting love, facing difficulties without him, although many people do when life has got so hard you think it couldn't get any worse. They turn to God in perhaps a horrendous situation. That thread that binds them to God, which they may well not have been aware of, in those difficult times, it draws them in. So this parable that we've had this morning, with all its nuances and metaphors, is a guide as to why we need to live our lives in Christ, in love and fellowship. Where does the love show itself in this abandoned chapel at Lumbuts? Well, I accepted the task. In fact, I volunteered because I was fascinated by it all, to sort out the bit of a mess that the graveyard records had become. The idea was that I had to be able to prove that the graveyard was full. So I was given this book, and that's all I had to start with. Eventually, some more paperwork came through and plans. So I thought, well, the only way to deal with this, it's in a state of dilapidation, and bear in mind, these are historical documents, they're not very well looked after. A real historian, although history was my subject when I was training to teach, would look at this aghast and say, but I started here in 1837, and the very first death recorded then was Sally Bentley. And she was 34 days old. The next one, the person, I won't read all the names, but the next age was 23, then 42, and then the next one, there's no age recorded. The next one was 46, then the next one was 4 days, 26, 3 months, 9, 1 year, 1 day, 5 months, 6 days, 10. I did a few pages of this and I couldn't do any more because I found it so heartbreaking. The rate of death of infants and children then was just horrendous. The rate of mothers dying in childbirth also was horrendous. When I eventually waded all through this book and made my own notes and records to find that some mums suffered the loss of up to 5 children just a few days after they were born. Such were the conditions. You think of Lumbots as a lovely place to live, all surrounded by fields. It's glorious. But when you look back as to what was going on in the 19th century, you think it wasn't much fun then. But these people who built this chapel and then extended the chapel and then extended the graveyard did so with love, in faith, in planning for the needs of the future. And we need to remember that when we look through and think, gosh, these records are in a bit of a mess. But there is love and purpose behind every burial that's taken place. And that continues now. Unfortunately, the graveyard is full. Other graveyards are available. But yes, the story of the runaway bunny and the story of Lumbot's graveyard are all the same thing. They're all to do with God's love. The man on the bus is to do with God's love. Wherever we look, God's love is there for each and every one of us. But his purpose for us is to spread that love beyond our doors, into our communities. Other people need to experience what we experience. Other people need to be enfolded in what we are enfolded in. And that's why we're here. That's why we come to worship on a Sunday. So even if you only remember the runaway bunny, that will be great. Okay.